The night air was thick with a sense of unease. A dog, scruffy and small with patches of gray fur, stood motionless outside an unfamiliar house, his eyes wide and searching the dark street. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. And yet, the dog knew something was not right. He shifted slightly, the cold concrete pressing against his paws. His heart raced, and each breath was sharp in the cool air. He wasn't sure why he was here, but the pull was undeniable. Something, or someone, inside that house was calling him. The window of the house was dimly lit, casting faint shadows onto the street, but nothing in the yard moved. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching him. The dog's ears perked, straining to hear every small sound, a faint creak from inside the house, a far-off car engine rumbling down the street. It felt as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for him to make a move. The air seemed heavier here, saturated with secrets. The dog's nose twitched, and he took a step closer, his body tense, ready to bolt at a moment's notice. But still, he lingered. The pull was too strong. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he knew that tonight would change everything. The dog's instincts told him to run, to flee into the shadows where he felt safe. Yet, something kept him rooted to the spot. His ears twitched, and his sharp eyes never left the house. He could feel the weight of the air, thick with secrets. As the minutes stretched on, his body began to ache, but his mind refused to leave. A soft whisper of sound reached his ears, almost imperceptible. A figure had moved behind the curtains, or so he thought. He couldn't tell whether it was his imagination or something far more sinister. He craned his neck, trying to get a better angle, but the darkness in the house only seemed to deepen. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. A car passed by on the street, its headlights briefly illuminating the dog's anxious face before disappearing into the distance. The dog's gaze shifted momentarily, but then returned to the house, feeling an overwhelming sense of purpose. There was something important here, something he had to uncover, something that had been hidden for far too long. And for the first time, the dog felt that he was not alone in this silent night. The house wasn't just waiting for him. It was waiting for something, or someone else. He was simply part of the plan, though he didn't yet know how. The air grew colder, the night deepened further, and the dog felt the weight of every second that passed. He inched closer to the window, his feet making no sound against the pavement. Every muscle in his small body was taut with anticipation. His eyes were locked on the window, yet the movement inside was barely noticeable. It was as if the house itself was breathing, exhaling its secrets, waiting for him to uncover them. The wind howled through the street, rustling the leaves and causing the tree branches to creak in the distance. But none of this seemed to matter to the dog. He was driven by something primal, something buried deep within him. He wanted to see, to know, what lay behind that window. It was not just curiosity, it was an inner pull that he couldn't explain. As he approached, the shadows around him seemed to stretch, as if the night itself were drawing closer, pressing against him. The closer he got to the window, the more he could feel it. Something was watching him from inside. Suddenly, the dog froze. The curtain shifted slightly, and the silhouette of a figure appeared within the house, barely visible against the dim interior. The dog's breath caught in his throat. The figure was tall, its movements slow and deliberate, as though it too was waiting for something. Was it a person? Or was there something else, something much darker, in that house? The dog could feel a pulse, a heartbeat, resonating in the silence, and it wasn't his own. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the figure, watching as it moved ever so slowly within the house. The street around him felt even quieter now, as if the entire world had stopped spinning. He was not sure what the figure wanted, but he knew one thing for sure: it was waiting for him. Without thinking, the dog took another step forward, his legs trembling, not with fear, but with the anticipation of what was to come. The dog's instincts screamed at him to flee, yet he stood motionless, the figure's presence pulling him in deeper. It was a strange, unexplainable connection, something ancient, rooted in the core of his being. He had seen this figure before, perhaps in a dream, but that did not matter now. The moment felt predestined, as though he had always known he would come to this point. Another gust of wind passed through the street, carrying the faint scent of something familiar. A sound broke through the tension, the soft creak of the door opening. The figure inside, now clearer, took a step towards the door. The dog, his heart racing, knew that this moment would change everything. There was no turning back. This was the beginning of something he didn't yet understand, but could feel in his very bones. The wind had picked up, swirling leaves around the dog's feet, but he remained still. The figure inside the house, now clearer with every passing moment, moved with a purpose. There was a coldness to the air that seemed to mirror the feeling creeping into his chest. The dog's heartbeat quickened. The door creaked open, revealing only the shadowy outline of the figure. It was tall, too tall, and its movements slow, deliberate, as if it had all the time in the world. The dog took a small step forward, his body stiff with anticipation, but not yet bold enough to approach the threshold. Something about the figure's presence was both a comfort and a threat. It was as if the air around the dog thickened, drawing him in. A faint smell reached his nose, musty, old, like the scent of forgotten things. His ears perked up, and he felt his legs tremble slightly. Was he supposed to be here? What was waiting for him behind that door? Another gust of wind brought the smell closer, and the dog's instincts surged. He had come this far, and now he couldn't turn back. He had to know. He needed to understand what was happening here, to uncover the secrets the house seemed to hold tightly in its walls. The figure inside the house took a step forward, and the dog instinctively took another step closer. His eyes never left the shadow, and the air felt thick with anticipation. For the first time, he questioned his decision to stay. The night had become colder, and the world outside the house felt distant, almost unreachable. A flicker of movement caught his eye, and he turned just in time to see a small animal darting across the yard. It wasn't just any animal, it was another dog, like him. But this one was moving differently, more cautiously, as if it had been living in the shadows for a long time. The dog's instincts told him to follow it, but something kept him tethered to the house. The figure inside, that looming presence, had him in its grip. His body screamed for action, but his mind was frozen, caught in the pull of something greater. He hadn't come this far to turn back now. As the figure took another slow step toward him, the dog's heart raced. Was it friend or foe? He couldn't tell. The house was a riddle, and he was the only one who could solve it. The dog's breath came out in shallow bursts. The wind was no longer the only sound in the night, the distant hum of traffic, the faint rustling of leaves, and now the soft footfalls of the figure approaching the door. The dog was trapped between two forces. One was the mysterious pull from inside the house. The other was the faint, familiar figure that had slipped across the yard. He glanced back, his eyes meeting the shadow of the other dog. It paused momentarily, its movements cautious. The air seemed to grow heavier, suffocating the dog's senses. Every instinct told him to trust the familiar figure, but the cold stare of the figure inside the house kept him rooted in place. The dog's paws shifted nervously, a slight rustle in the grass. Should he approach? Should he back away? The presence in the doorway grew stronger. It had noticed his hesitation, and the dog could feel it in the way the air buzzed. The moment was approaching. A decision would have to be made soon. The dog's gaze shifted back to the familiar figure, still standing at the edge of the yard. Then, as if responding to some silent command, it darted toward the door, vanishing into the darkness. With a sudden surge of energy, the dog bolted forward. His body was no longer under his control. His instincts had taken over. The figure inside the house seemed to freeze, as if it had anticipated this moment. The dog's paws hit the ground with a soft thud, each step taking him closer to the door. But as he drew nearer, the door slammed shut, blocking his path. He skidded to a halt, his heart pounding in his chest. The silence that followed was deafening. The figure inside hadn't moved. It had simply stood still, watching. The air felt colder now, and the darkness seemed to close in around him. The dog was no longer sure if he was in control. The house had taken on a life of its own, and he was merely a guest in its domain. The distant sound of a door creaking open echoed in the silence. Was the other dog still out there? The dog turned, scanning the yard, but saw nothing. The weight of the house secrets pressed against him, and for the first time, he wondered if he was ready to learn them. The door's sudden slam echoed in the dog's mind, a sharp reminder that he wasn't in control of this situation. The figure inside the house remained still, its eyes seemingly following his every move. The dog backed away slowly, the feeling of being watched never leaving him. As he moved, a low growl emanated from behind him. It was the familiar dog from earlier, but now it had emerged from the shadows. Its fur was matted, its eyes dark and knowing. There was no fear in its gaze, only a quiet understanding, as if it had been waiting for this moment. The dog hesitated for a moment, torn between the pull of the house and the presence of the other dog. Then, with a final glance at the door, he made his choice. He turned toward the other dog, his instincts telling him that this creature, unlike the figure inside, would guide him. But as he moved closer, the other dog suddenly darted into the darkness. Was it leading him, or was it running from something? The dog couldn't tell, but he had no choice but to follow. The dog followed the familiar shadow, his paws pressing into the cold ground as he moved toward the darkened yard. He could feel the presence of the house behind him, always there, watching. The dog's senses were heightened. Something wasn't right. The familiar dog darted between the trees, its movements swift like a ghost in the shadows. Each step was calculated, as if the creature knew the dangers that lay ahead. The dog's heart raced as he followed, unsure of what awaited him, but trusting the creature's guidance. It led him deeper into the forest behind the house, away from the streetlight's feeble glow. There was a strange silence here, only the sound of leaves crunching beneath their paws. The air felt colder as they ventured further, the trees thickening around them. The dog's instinct screamed to stop, to turn back, but the strange presence of the familiar dog compelled him forward. The deeper they went, the more the dog began to feel the weight of the forest pressing in on him. The trees seemed to close around him, blocking out the faint moonlight. His paws brushed over soft earth, and his senses went on high alert. There was something here, something that wasn't right. The other dog had stopped, its back arched, its head held high as it sniffed the air. The dog slowed his pace, his ears pricked. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He could hear something. A faint rustling in the bushes. But when he turned, there was nothing there. His breath came quicker, and his eyes darted from one shadow to the next. It was as if they were being followed. The air seemed to thicken, pressing against him, suffocating him. The other dog glanced back, its eyes full of warning. They were not alone. A low growl echoed through the woods, and the dog's muscles tensed. His instincts screamed that they were being hunted. But who or what was hunting them? He turned, his eyes scanning the darkened forest. Nothing. Nobody. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by the sound of heavy breathing. The other dog snapped its head around, and before the dog could react, it bolted into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. The dog's heart pounded in his chest. He had to follow. He darted after the creature, his paws pounding against the earth. The trees blurred by him as he chased the shadow. The sound of branches snapping and leaves crunching underfoot echoed in the night air. He couldn't lose the other dog. He had no choice. The dog finally stopped at the edge of a clearing. The moonlight spilled in, casting a ghostly glow over the open space. The familiar dog stood in the middle of the clearing, staring directly at him. But there was something different about it now. Its eyes glowed faintly, an unnatural hue that sent a chill through the dog's spine. The dog stepped forward cautiously, his senses on high alert. The other dog made no move, just watched him with those strange glowing eyes. The air was heavy, the night sky unbroken by the sounds of the forest. Everything was still. Too still. As the dog neared, the ground beneath him suddenly shifted. a low rumble shaking the earth. The trees trembled, and the ground cracked open. The familiar dog stepped backward, still watching the dog with its eerie gaze. The dog's paws dug into the earth as the ground beneath him trembled. He felt the pulse of something ancient, something powerful, coming from beneath the surface. The familiar dog's eyes never left him, and the dog could sense that it was trying to warn him, but its message was unclear. With a final rumble, the ground split open completely, revealing a dark abyss that seemed to go on forever. The dog backed away slowly, his heart racing. A distant guttural growl echoed from the depths of the earth, sending shivers down his spine. The dog knew they were not alone anymore. Something was rising from the abyss. The other dog turned and bolted into the forest, disappearing into the darkness once more. The dog stood frozen, staring into the gaping hole, unsure of what was about to emerge. The abyss yawned open before the dog, its darkness swallowing the light. A low, guttural growl emanated from the depths, vibrating the ground beneath his paws. He could feel the earth tremble, and the air around him grew thick, as though something ancient and malevolent was awakening. The dog stepped back, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that something terrible was coming, something that had been hidden for far too long. The familiar dog had vanished into the trees, leaving the dog alone at the edge of the darkness. His senses screamed for him to run, but his legs felt rooted to the ground. The ominous growl echoed again, now followed by a scraping sound, like claws dragging against stone. The dog's fur stood on end, and every instinct urged him to flee. But it was too late. The first tendril of shadow emerged from the abyss, slowly writhing and twisting. The shadow grew thicker, stretching out like long, sinuous fingers. It coiled and uncoiled, moving with unnatural precision. The air around the dog grew colder, and he felt the hairs on the back of his neck bristle. He took a step back, but his feet felt heavy, as though the ground itself was holding him in place. The growling grew louder, closer. The dog's body tensed, every muscle preparing for flight, yet unable to move. He could feel the pull of the abyss, drawing him toward it. The tendrils of shadow twisted more rapidly now, a pulsating rhythm that seemed to echo in the dog's chest. He could no longer ignore the pull, and it took everything in him to force himself to turn away from the abyss. A strange, powerful presence was rising from within, and the dog knew that something far worse than anything he had imagined was about to break free. With a final deafening growl, a massive form emerged from the abyss. It was a creature of shadow and darkness, its shape constantly shifting, as though it could never decide what it truly was. The dog's breath caught in his throat as the creature's glowing eyes locked onto him. He could feel its malice radiating, the oppressive weight of its presence nearly suffocating. The familiar dog's eyes flashed in his memory. It had warned him, it had known this would happen. But now, it was too late. The dog's paws were frozen in place as the creature took its first step forward. The earth cracked beneath its weight. The growl from deep within the creature reverberated, shaking the dog's very core. Every instinct told him to run, but there was no escaping this nightmare. The dog's mind raced. He couldn't stay here. He needed to escape, but his body refused to obey. The creature's presence was overwhelming, and the air around him pulsed with an unnatural energy. Every muscle in his body screamed for movement, yet his feet felt as though they were glued to the ground. The creature moved forward, its eyes never leaving the dog. The growl deepened into a rumble, vibrating the very air around them. Suddenly, the dog remembered the familiar dog's warning. He turned toward the trees, hoping to find an escape. But before he could move, the creature let out a deafening roar that shook the ground beneath his paws. The dog stumbled, almost falling, as the roar echoed through the forest. His heart pounded in his chest. There was no escaping. Not now. Not unless he confronted the darkness head-on. The dog's breath came in ragged gasps. It was now or never. The creature was nearly upon him, its monstrous form looming above. With a final surge of adrenaline, the dog broke free from his frozen state, running as fast as his legs would carry him. The earth beneath him shook as the creature roared again, the ground cracking open behind him. He leapt over roots and dodged branches, pushing himself harder than he ever had before. The familiar dog was nowhere to be seen, but the dog knew he couldn't stop. The shadows were chasing him, reaching for him, and the creature's growl echoed through the forest like thunder. With every step, the dog's body grew weaker, but he knew that if he didn't get away, the darkness would consume him. The dog's paws struck the ground with urgency, his heart hammering in his chest as the shadows closed in behind him. Every step felt like it could be his last. The ground trembled with each roar from the creature, its presence growing heavier in the air. His legs burned with the effort to keep running, but there was no time to stop. His instincts pushed him forward, making him dart between trees, leap over fallen logs, and scramble through the underbrush. The creature's growl resonated through the woods, a chilling reminder that he was not yet free. A sharp sudden turn, and the dog stumbled into a clearing. The wind howled, and the forest seemed to be alive with whispers. The dog skidded to a halt, panting heavily. His breath came in sharp bursts, his body shaking from exhaustion. He glanced back, the shadows in the distance swirling like a storm. The creature was still chasing him, but for now, he had a moment to think. As the dog stood there gasping for air, a strange sensation washed over him. It was as if the clearing itself had shifted, the space around him changing. The shadows seemed to pull away for a moment, revealing a figure standing at the far side of the clearing. The dog froze. It was the familiar dog, but it wasn't the same. The creature's glowing eyes, once filled with warning, now seemed to carry a different weight. The dog could feel it. This was not an ordinary animal. There was something else beneath the surface. The familiar dog's eyes met his, and for the first time it felt like it was speaking to him, not through sound, but through something deeper. A shared understanding. The shadows around them flickered, as if the forest itself was listening. The familiar dog stepped closer, its form glowing faintly in the dark. It stopped just within reach, eyes full of a quiet resolve. The truth, he realized, was far more complex than he could have imagined. The dog's heart raced, but not from fear. The truth was starting to unfold, but he didn't yet understand it fully. The familiar dog moved closer, stepping lightly across the clearing, its eyes never leaving the dog's face. The shadows around them writhed, still alive with an otherworldly energy. "You were never meant to face this alone," the familiar dog seemed to convey through its gaze. The dog's breath caught in his throat as memories began to resurface. He had been abandoned, left to survive on his own, but this moment felt different. This was no accident. The dog had been drawn here for a reason. The creature, the abyss, the shadows, it all made sense now. The familiar dog wasn't merely a companion. It was a guide, a protector, one that had been waiting for him. The dog stood still, trying to process it all. It had been waiting for him to understand the greater truth. The shadows weren't the true enemy. They were part of the same force, bound to something much older, much deeper. With the understanding between them, the familiar dog turned its head toward the abyss, and the dog followed its gaze. The creature's form had taken shape once more, but it was no longer the same. It seemed to be bound to the earth, a force that had been awakened, and now it was seeking release. The shadows around it pulsed with an unnatural energy. The dog could feel the ground shaking beneath his paws. This wasn't just an enemy to run from. It was a force that needed to be contained. The dog glanced at the familiar dog, now standing beside him. There was a connection between them, a bond forged by fate. They had been brought together for this moment. The dog's heart steadied as he realized what he had to do. It was time to face the creature. He couldn't run anymore. Together with the familiar dog, they could stop the force rising from the abyss. They had to act now, before it was too late. The familiar dog took a step forward, its body tense, and the dog followed, his paws steady beneath him. The creature's eyes glowed brighter as they advanced, its form shifting with each step. But the dog wasn't afraid anymore. The bond between him and the familiar dog was unbreakable. The creature let out a deep, resonant growl, its form lurching toward them. The dog stepped forward, his eyes locked on the creature's, and for the first time he understood the depths of its power. But he wasn't alone. Together they stood as one, their combined will strong enough to confront the darkness. The creature's tendrils reached for them, but the dog and the familiar dog stood firm, prepared to face what was to come. The shadows swirled around them, but the light from their bond pushed back the darkness. With a final united roar, they struck together, facing the creature as the forest stood still, waiting for the outcome. The creature's growl reverberated through the clearing, shaking the trees as its tendrils reached out toward the two dogs. The dog stood firm, his eyes locked onto the creature's glowing eyes, feeling the pulse of energy between them. The familiar dog's presence beside him was a steadying force, but the weight of the moment was undeniable. This was it, the final confrontation. The dog felt the ground beneath him tremble as the creature began to charge, its massive form towering over the two of them. Every muscle in the dog's body was ready to spring into action. He had faced fear before, but never like this. The air was thick with tension. The creature was no longer just a shadow. It was something real, something powerful. With a deep breath, the dog prepared himself. Together, they would face this threat, no matter the cost. With a burst of motion, the creature lunged, its massive form charging toward them. The dog reacted instinctively, sprinting forward with the familiar dog by his side. The two dogs leapt into action, dodging the creature's tendrils as they swirled around them. The air crackled with energy, and every movement felt like a fight for survival. The creature roared in fury, its eyes burning with hatred as it swiped at them. The dog and the familiar dog moved with precision, each step a calculated risk. The dog's heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline fueling every action. The forest around them seemed to fade, the battle consuming all. The creature's roar filled the air, but the dog's determination was even louder. Together they were stronger. The dog's body burned with exhaustion, but he couldn't stop. The creature's strength was overwhelming, but the bond between him and the familiar dog kept him going. He watched as the familiar dog darted in front of him, distracting the creature long enough for the dog to take another shot. The creature roared in anger, but the dog's focus remained unshaken. He understood now. This battle wasn't just about defeating the creature, it was about understanding the force that had awoken it. The shadows around them swirled like a storm, and the dog realized that the creature was drawing its strength from the darkness itself. If they were going to win, they had to break that bond. They had to confront the darkness head-on. The familiar dog, sensing the moment, made a bold move. With a growl, it charged directly toward the creature, distracting it long enough for the dog to make his move. He sprinted toward the creature, feeling the weight of the darkness pressing against him. As the creature lunged toward the familiar dog, the dog took his chance. He leapt, his paws striking the ground with precision, and with one final desperate motion, he made contact with the creature's core. A burst of light exploded from within, and the creature's body twisted and recoiled in agony. The darkness around them started to dissipate, the swirling tendrils losing their power. The dog's heart raced as he held his ground, knowing that this was the turning point. The creature was weakening. It wasn't over yet, but they were close. With a final earth-shattering roar, the creature collapsed, its body disintegrating into shadows. The tendrils that had once thrived around it now dissipated into nothingness, and the moonlight returned to the clearing, cutting through the darkness. The dog stood, panting heavily, his body aching from the battle. The familiar dog approached, its glowing eyes softening as the two stood together, the darkness finally vanquished. They had done it. The dog could feel the weight of the moment. The forest was silent now, the oppressive energy that had filled it replaced by a calm, peaceful stillness. The abyss that had once threatened to consume everything had closed. The dog looked at the familiar dog, gratitude filling his heart. Together, they had faced the impossible, and together, they had won. The moonlight shone brightly over the clearing as the last remnants of darkness melted away. The air was still, almost peaceful, as if the forest itself was breathing a sigh of relief. The dog stood tall, his body weary but resolute. He had faced the abyss and emerged victorious, but the journey had changed him. No longer the lone stray, he now understood the true meaning of connection. The familiar dog stood beside him, its eyes filled with a quiet understanding. There was no more battle to fight. The shadows had been banished, the creature's dark presence erased from the world. The dog's heart swelled with gratitude. In this moment he realized that his struggle wasn't just about survival. It was about finding a place, a purpose, and companionship. The journey had been long and arduous, but now he had everything he needed to move forward. With the creature vanquished, the dog and the familiar dog turned toward the forest. The familiar dog's movements were fluid, natural, as it led the way through the trees. The dog followed, feeling a sense of belonging that he had never known before. It was strange, this sense of home. He had wandered alone for so long, never knowing where he belonged, but now, with each step, he felt anchored. The forest was no longer a place of danger, it had become a refuge. The familiar dog glanced back at him, its eyes soft and reassuring, as though telling him that this was where he was meant to be. The dog's steps grew lighter, no longer weighed down by the uncertainty of his past. The path ahead was unknown, but for the first time, it didn't matter. He was no longer alone. As they journeyed deeper into the woods, the dog began to notice the small, quiet signs of life around them. The soft rustle of leaves, the distant chirp of birds, the flutter of wings. The world was alive again, filled with hope and renewal. The dog had once thought that the forest was a place of fear, a place where he was constantly hunted, but now it was a place of beauty. The familiar dog had shown him the truth, that the forest was not his enemy, but a part of him. With each step, the bond between them grew stronger, and the dog realized that he had not just found a companion, but a protector and a guide. The path ahead would have its challenges, but together they could face anything. They reached a clearing, a peaceful glade with a small stream running through it. The dog stopped for a moment, the gentle sound of the water soothing his weary mind. He looked around the glade, taking in the beauty of the untouched world around him. The familiar dog sat beside him, its eyes soft and watchful. This was no longer a place of fear, but a place of sanctuary. The dog took a deep breath, letting the calm wash over him. He realized that this was the beginning of something new. He had found a home, not just in the forest, but within himself. He was no longer the stray who wandered alone. He was part of something greater, something that had always been waiting for him. As the sun began to rise, casting its golden light over the forest, the dog and the familiar dog stood together, looking toward the horizon. There was no longer fear in the dog's heart, only hope. The world was vast, and their journey was far from over, but he no longer had to face it alone. The familiar dog had shown him that he was part of something much larger than himself, and together, they would continue to walk this path. The dog turned to look at the familiar dog, and in its eyes he saw a future, one filled with purpose, companionship, and adventure. The forest, once a place of danger, now felt like a home, and he knew with certainty that he had found his place in it.